Hello, folks. Welcome back to WW2 TV and the second of our double bill of shows today. And in our earlier one, we briefly discussed or referred to the importance of minesweeping. Well, Nick Stanley, Minesweepers Victory on social media, returns to the channel to explain more about this lengthy but vital operation. So I'll bring him in now. Good evening, Nick. How are you today?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. So, what have you been up to since last we spoke? You're still banging the drum of minesweeping on social media, but anything else particularly been involved in?
Well, lots of stuff. There are non-military, non-naval, but the main thing has been just keeping the X feed going, a day-by-day account of the minesweeping war, 80 years on. We're down to the last year now, so I'm sort of on the downward slope of it. Thinking possibly there's a book somewhere to be done, but really, I just want to rest when I finish the tweet.
Well, yeah, I'm feeling the stress of the 80th anniversaries this year. That I kind of looking forward to August next year when I can maybe slow the pace down a bit. But the point is, we're here to talk about the sweeping of the Scheldt. So I'll bring up your PowerPoint. So, folks, fire away with questions and things as we go along. But I'm going to hand over to Nick to take us through. And at the end of this, hopefully, we'll have a greater understanding of this incredibly important operation. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul. Right, so first of all, thanks for letting me butt in on your channel, because when I saw you had the Scheldt coming up, I did show very sharp elbows in trying to get in on the feed, because fundamentally, all the land battles were part of a maritime campaign geared up to freeing up the Scheldt. Yeah. So 21st Army Group was fighting a maritime campaign, if you go into classical maritime theory. And therefore, it struck me that we do have to talk about what they were fighting for on land, what the sacrifice of the Canadians and the Brits, who were fighting in horrendous conditions, which you're already covering, was all to an end state. And the end state wasn't necessarily the defeat of the Germans; it was clearing the banks of the Scheldt, so that we could get a minesweeping effort going, and therefore start using the fantastic capacity of Antwerp to resupply the Allied armies along the Western Front, who were still being fed over the beaches. So
that's really the theme of the last few weeks, is that it's all come down to ports. We've got a Dragoon show on Wednesday. We've talked about the Brittany ports. We've talked about the south of France ports. Of course, Cherbourg in Normandy, Le Havre doesn't fall till September. The logistics headache has been really rearing its ugly head through the kind of the end of the summer and into autumn of 1944, and Antwerp and the Scheldt does seem to be the solution to that, or partial solution, I should say, to that issue. So it's all been building towards this over the last few weeks on the channel.
Yeah, and looking at the Admiralty war diaries for the period, I'm over all the ports between the Brittany Peninsula, so from Brest through Cherbourg, through Caen, through Dieppe, Le Havre, Rouen, which they're still trying to get open. They were bringing in 40,000 tons of stores a day on a good day. Well, they could handle that every day without a problem in Antwerp. And in fact, they set themselves that limit at Antwerp. The capacity of Antwerp was double that. So you had this magnificent logistic facility just behind the Allied armies, which really needed to be opened. Yeah. And I think it was naval people who first spotted this, or certainly first flagged it up. And if you go to the next slide, I think you've got Ramsey there. And Ramsey, Antwerp fell on something like the 4th of September. And on the 3rd of September, Antwerp signaled Eisenhower saying, once we've got Antwerp, that's not the end of it. We're not going to be able to use it until we've got both banks clear and we can sweep the mines clear. That only then can we get the vessels in. Mm-hmm. So Ramsey was really on it from the very beginning. So you had that on, and then 21st Army Group. It's in their patch, and that's my slightly tongue-in-cheek depiction of what was happening.
And yet it does explain it pretty damn well, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, and it works. It works. Ramsey was definitely disappointed. All the naval commanders were disappointed. Commander-in-Chief Knorr, who was Admiral of the Fleet, Sir John Tovey, who'd previously been Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet for the sinking of the Bismarck, he was badgering as well, that telling Ramsey to make sure that Eisenhower and SHAEF HQ understood that they were going nowhere until the banks had been cleared. And that's again on the next slide, I think.
Yeah, let's move to that.
And after the fun and games at Market Garden, and that was like 17th, 25th of September. I think it was on the 15th of October that Eisenhower gave pretty firm direction and guidance to Montgomery that Antwerp was to be his main effort. That Antwerp was a main effort for the whole Western Front at that point, because of the dependence upon the logistics. So that was when the message was made loud and clear, and the Canadian Army became main effort for using that term for the Allied armies to get Antwerp open. What I want to talk about now is the battle space. And in an army briefing, you talk about terrain, enemy forces, own forces. So we'll talk about the terrain here, the terrain of the Scheldt. 80 kilometers long from the entrance between Flushing and Breskens. So that's 50 nautical miles if we go imperial, and quite a nasty, difficult navigational channel. Obviously, in peacetime, it's well buoyed. In wartime, a lot of the buoys had been removed by the Germans. Some of the buoys that remained were being shot at by bored Canadian soldiers and commandos and being sunk, which Ramsey asked them to stop forthwith on that one. A winding channel, a difficult channel, so you're going to be relying heavily on pilots there. Flat land surrounding it, as the Canadian Army had discovered, and that the implication for that is that there was no natural shelter from the winds for any minesweepers or any vessels operating up there. So any strong winds would come through. There was no protection from the land. So gales, and we're talking now about November when this happened, they were going to really disrupt minesweeping efforts. And that happened on a number of occasions during this battle. So really, a really difficult piece of water to sweep. Narrow, winding, shallow, lots of obstructions in there. I think in the middle of October, a directive went out to the Royal Air Force and Coastal Command to stop sinking any enemy ships in the Scheldt, because they were just going to be an obstruction to the minesweeping effort that would follow. So they knew it was going to be difficult, even without the mines to counter. And of course, Germany had had a long time to prepare this ground defensively, to prepare this water defensively. And I think the importance of Antwerp is reflected really in the Battle of the Bulge, where the initial German offensive was targeted at Antwerp, because that was the strategic target. So for the Minesweepers, this after perhaps D-Day, this was the most important strategic campaign for Minesweepers in the Second World War, getting the port open, getting the route to the port safe, so that merchant convoys could get in there.
And a quick question for you, Nick. I mean, it's because of its location on the coast there. This must have been part of the general reconnaissance of the entire coasts of Europe, going back to the earliest incarnations of the Overlord plan. So there are certain battles that end up taking place in kind of 44, 45, where the Allies didn't necessarily expect themselves to be. But this clearly has been on the radar, no pun intended, for months, if not years. And indeed, Coastal Command are doing operations kind of over that back in 1940. So I'm assuming there was some knowledge within the Royal Navy, within the Allies, about, you know, tides and currents and depths and things like that. It's not like they're going into this completely blind, I'm assuming.
They weren't completely blind, because they also had, as part of the Allied minesweeping force, we had Belgian minesweeper crews, and we had Dutch minesweeper crews. So we had some local knowledge, and that was going to be of great assistance. We also had a bunch of pilots, Dutch and Belgian pilots, responsible for navigating merchant vessels up there. And on day one, they were sort of putting their hands up, knocking on the door, saying, okay, we can go now. But of course, the mines hadn't been cleared, but there was that local knowledge that was going to help us for sure.
And we had the question, Ian, about how much use the Germans had made of Antwerp. So Ian said, had the Germans made much use of it? And also, had the German mines been laid earlier in the war with established safe routes, or was it more kind of last minute, or a combination of both?
The German minefields had been laid in the southern North Sea, so covering the outer approaches to the Scheldt. In terms of the estuary itself, it wasn't really mined until it wasn't mined properly defensively until they could see which way the tide was running after Normandy.
Right, thank you.
And in terms of the German use of Antwerp, I'm afraid I don't know that one, but I wouldn't have thought it would be. It certainly wasn't a significant maritime reinforcement route for them, because it would have been so wide open to Allied interdiction.
Yeah, that's why I think it's for anything to do with the U-boats in Atlantic, it's the ports in Brittany and things like that are far more important. But yeah, great introduction to this. And Kevin asked, did the Allies mine the estuary earlier on in the war? Do we know?
Yeah, we were mining the estuary, and extensive mining going on in all those sort of waters. Also, I learned this just a few weeks ago from a fellow mine warfare and diving buddy who'd done a NATO exercise off Walcheren and in those waters, and they found loads of RAF bombs. And apparently, any RAF bombers who were struggling, who didn't think they could make the target or something like that, it was quite common for them to ditch their bomb loads in the North Sea. And a lot of them were off the estuary as well. And they were recovering those in peacetime exercises just 5 or 6 years ago. And there'll still be loads more down there, I imagine.
Okay, well, thanks. Back to you.
Okay, so that's really the terrain they're fighting in. If we look now against the threat they faced, if you go on to the next slide, please, Woody. Okay, so the blue lines on there are the known minefields in the outer approaches. And of course, the mine, as far as the Minesweepers were concerned, was the principal threat. So we'll look at some of the details of the mines, but there were known minefields there. But obviously, in the West Scheldt itself, once you get past the Breskins Flushing Gap, it was going to be a complete mystery. But they had a pretty good idea how bad it was going to be, because we just fought a major campaign off the Normandy beachhead. And if we sort of rewind to Normandy, the key mine battle there wasn't necessarily the breakthrough that got the Allied invasion onto the beaches, where we had 10 flotillas just going through the main mine barrier. It was in the weeks and months that followed where German aircraft laid nearly 2,000 mines in the waters off the beachhead, really bogging down the reinforcement rate, a massive minesweeping challenge.
And indeed, when you were on talking about the Normandy operations back whenever that was, I mean, I would like to think that the minesweeping operations, like a lot of Allied concepts by the winter of 44, were kind of reaching their peak of organization, efficiency, the kind of the earlier years of 41 and 42, and everybody learning on the job and 2 steps forward, 1 step back. By 1944, the Allies are getting pretty damn professional. And as you say, that whole operation in the Bay of the Seine, I'm assuming they're coming out of this into this campaign at kind of, even if they're not a bit weary, at the peak of their kind of efficiency and measures. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and these are people who are at the top of the game at this point, without doubt. And we'll talk about our own forces, but by and large, the forces we used for this weren't the same as we'd used for D-Day, because a lot of those forces were still working off Ostend, off Dieppe, working between Le Havre and Rouen at the River Seine, working off Cherbourg, working off Brest, places like that. So a lot of these forces were going to come in from the UK, but as I'll explain shortly, these were people who were on their A game. Yeah. Interestingly, the Normandy, the D-Day, the Overlord minesweeping forces, I think they were getting quite tired at this point. And just a manifestation of this was that in August there was a staff mistake, which resulted in a blue on blue, which lost us three halcyon minesweepers in an RAF attack, and that was a staffing error in Staff HQ. And I'm fundamentally of the belief that this was an exhausted staff team who just missed something. But as I say, our own forces actually came mainly from the UK on this job. The other, so we talk about the mines. The other enemy forces, again, based on what had been happening off the Normandy beachhead, we expected significant E-boat activity, trying to get in and lay mines, and that was a recurrent theme throughout this. We also expected ships to be vulnerable to the mini submarines that they've been using, to the human torpedoes, explosive boats. All of these we were expecting in the outer approaches to the Scheldt, and we really focusing mainly on the mines on the inside. So those were the enemy forces. We had the air cover to protect us pretty much from air interdiction. And we look now at the mines principal threat, as I said, and these are your classical moored contact mines. The bigger ones were found in the outer approaches where you've got deeper water. These are contact mines moored in the water, and just don't touch the chemical horns because they'll break and set off the circuit, and you'll have 300, 400, 500 pounds of HE going off, which is definitely going to ruin your day. One of the things they were using on these mines were heavy cable chains as mooring chains, which made them very, very difficult to sweep. So this was an ongoing problem throughout the outer Scheldt clearance operations. Some of the smaller auxiliaries just couldn't budge these, couldn't cut the cables, just losing a lot of gear on it because the Germans were putting obstructors, cutters, explosive charges on their mine cables just to disrupt the sweeping effort. Wow. So that was the classical mine threat there that you see. And moving on, and then the threat from ground mines, ground influence mines, was massive. It was the biggest threat off the Normandy beachheads, magnetic, acoustic, and then pressure mines, which we had no means of sweeping effectively. Those had been thrown out of Normandy, so we knew there would be a lot of these in the waters as well. So these were going to be a very, very significant threat. Far more dangerous than the contact mines, bigger explosive charges, and these were just ship killers, absolute ship killers. So this was the influence mine threat. So we're already talking about lots of different mine sweeping techniques we're going to have to adapt to clear this waterway. And then going on, this was taken about 2 weeks ago, and these are what the German ground mines look like. And these were 3 of them that were found doing some excavation work around Flushing Harbour or Vlissingen, and they found these babies.
Wow!
So they missed them in the port clearance operations. So
well, if it's only 3 they missed, I think we can forgive them that, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about the port party divers who were doing a lot of the searches for this sort of stuff. We'll come up to them, but yeah. So I just thought that was a hugely relevant and slightly entertaining picture of what the reality of these things were, and these things are monsters. And yeah, there's some foreshortening on the photograph bottom right, but you can get an impression of the damage they would cause if you're sitting on top of one when they go off.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the scale of those wind yeah, wow. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant stuff.
In the estuary itself, where it got shallower, they're expecting what the Germans class as anti-invasion mines. And you've got 2 sorts here. On the right-hand side, a very, very simple, very light contact type mine, but it could be moored in shallow waters and a smaller charge, but you're probably going to be dealing with smaller boats in a narrow estuary. So these were scattered in quite profusion. And then on the left, these were called Katie mines. They've been used a lot in Cherbourg. We found them in Brest. We found them Dieppe and Ostend. They were just running into them in Ostend at this time as well. So these had a snag line which drifted on the surface of the water, which was attached to a horn. So if the snag line got caught in a boat's propellers, it would set the mine off. And also for keeps, it had a contact horn as well on top for the deeper draft vessels. And just sitting on the seabed in a concrete sinker. And these are quite a big threat as well. So we had to have tactics to deal with these as well. And the ships that were going to, or the vessels that were going to do the fighting for us in terms of the mine sweeping. Top left, we have the fleet Minesweepers. These were the big boys, 1,000 tons plus. So not geared for the inner estuary. They weren't going to go into the inner estuary because of the draft, metal hulls, but they had a lot of grunt, so they could do some serious minesweeping through contact minefields. They could do acoustic sweeping. They could do magnetic sweeping. And these were the ones who were going to do the outer approaches, if you like, until it got too shallow for them, at which point they'd then have to hand over to the smaller auxiliaries. And down on the bottom right, you've got the British Yard Minesweepers, BYMS, all of them built in America, where they're known as Yard Minesweepers. And these were really, really handy boats, wooden hull, fairly shallow draft, and they could do mechanical minesweeping with the wires. They could do acoustic, they could do magnetic minesweeping. Their wire sweeping, they just weren't quite as robust as the bigger fleet sweepers. But these vessels were going to be absolutely ideal for the waters of the Scheldt, in the approaches and in the inner Scheldt. So that was going to be really, really handy. And we had hundreds of these built, and they did invaluable service for us, as did the vessels in the next slide. Top left, these were motor minesweepers based on a trawler design, classified MMS motor minesweepers. And my father-in-law was a minesweeper man. He said they were called Mickey Mouse sweepers because they were small. Smaller ones were 105 feet, and they predominantly used the smaller ones in the Scheldt because they were handier. A lot of them were built in Canada. I really would not have fancied bringing one of those over from Canada to the UK during the Battle of the Atlantic. It can't have been much fun. Again, very shallow draft, wooden hull, so it wasn't going to be a problem with magnetic mines. They could carry acoustic sweeps, and you see one mounted in the bow there called an acoustic hammer, and that was just lowered over the bow, and inside effectively there was a pneumatic drill which would just sound off underwater. And even though it was very, very simple technology, it was very, very effective. And out the back, they'd have their magnetic sweep, which would be two long coils streamed astern. Bottom right, we had motor launches. And you were talking about the Allies having learned a lot of lessons, and the use of motor launches, and that was a lesson from the Mediterranean when they were first used. During the Siege of Malta, we pretty much ran out of minesweepers. So they started putting sweeps on motor launches. That's all they had. And then as Germany started to develop counter minesweeping tactics and laying shallow laid mines, so mines are very close to the surface to take out the minesweepers, then you try and get even smaller boats in. So then you're using motor launches. And motor launches had preceded the assault flotillas into the D-Day beaches. And they were now going to be used ahead of the slightly larger auxiliaries, which were going to be used ahead of the much larger fleet sweepers. So we'd got this development of tactics that was ongoing throughout the Second World War.
And is that basically the system, that there are various types of sweeping for different types of vessels to deal with the various types of mines? It's not like during World War II there was a single solution to this problem, whereas some things, I don't know, like long range escort bombers, there are kind of a single solution. The Mustang could go that much further, it kind of solves that problem. But with minesweeping, it's not like you can find that single solution. It's never going to be like that. It's always going to be this kind of multi-use solution to it.
Yeah, and if you're a minefield planner, you can just play so many tunes with your minefield,
right? Yeah,
and we will say in sort of in the ANRAC world, it's not the mine, it's the minefield that is the weapon. But you can put different settings, you can put different magnetic settings on, you can put different acoustic settings on, you can put arming delays, you can put ship counts on, you can set your moored mines at different depths, so you can just make it a really, really complex picture. So when you want to go in and deal with this sort of thing, you're going to have a full hand of capabilities to be able to counter all the options that are available to the minefield planners.
Thank you.
And in terms of actuations, we talk about that. They have to go over these mines up to 17, 18 times before they're confident they've gone through all the actuation options for the Germans. Because they could delay them for a 17 or 18 ship count. So you could go up and down 15 times and declare, that area was safe of mines. you put a merchant vessel through, and it's a ship count of 16, and the merchant vessel goes up. So it was really, really difficult. And of course, then if you're in a narrow channel like the Scheldt, you do not want to be losing vessels in the channel, because it becomes a massive navigational problem.
Okay, thank you. Moving on.
We also had armed merchant trawlers. Either trawlers that we'd taken up from trade, although with the introduction of some of the auxiliaries, we were starting to hand back trawlers now to the fishing industry. But we still had trawlers that taken up from trade, again, useful shallow water. And also we had Admiralty-built trawlers for minesweeping purposes and anti-submarine purposes. And also some of these trawlers we used as down layers, because it's all very well sweeping a channel, but you then got to mark it to make sure the ships that are going to follow you in know they're in safe water. So every minesweeping effort was followed by a large number of dan layers, laying prodigious quantities of dan buoys in the water. The one bottom right is HMS Colsay, and she was actually sunk by a German human torpedo off Ostend just before Operation Calendar started. But these were a vital part of the minesweeping package, because minesweeping is irrelevant unless you mark the channel and unless vessels can go safely down the channel.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Going on, and these guys were getting more and more important once we started capturing ports. Ports party divers, port clearance, basically. D-Day on D+1, 7th of June, these guys were in Ouistreham already diving to look for booby traps, look for bombs or mines or whatever obstructions in ports. And of course, as we moved further and further up the coasts, capturing all these channel ports, these divers were in incredibly high demand to come and check ports out to see what was in the water. So these were a very, very valuable asset by this time of the war. And what happened was that I think in mid-October, these guys had already gone in overland. These guys were already diving in the port of Antwerp 6 weeks before Antwerp was actually cleared to receive shipping. So these guys were going along the berths, going along the wharfs, the quaysides, in the basins, everything, just looking for mines. And they found between them and some other minesweeping means, they cleared about 50 or 60 mines themselves before the convoys arrived and before the main minesweeping effort had been completed.
Wow.
They were helped by also overland. We sent trucks and trailers with portable pulsing units, they're called, with a portable magnetic sweep. So a lorry would just park up next to a basin in the dockyard or a wharf or quay, and it would just put this tail of coil in the water and start pulsing out a magnetic signature. So they were able to start clearing in the docklands before the river was cleared. But these were absolutely essential efforts that were going on.
Brilliant.
In terms of some of the tactics, top left, you've got the classical wire sweeping, thick, heavy wires, possibly with cutters attached, held out by otters, held down by a kite, and they were just going to cut your moored mines for you. Delivered either by the fleet sweepers or the BYMS craft, further inshore in the shallow water. And bottom right, you've got a normal formation for a magnetic sweep, each vessel towing 2 lengths of coil behind it, working together, pulsing together to create a strong magnetic field to try and set off magnetic mines. And in the bows of these vessels, they'd have the acoustic hammer over the bows, so you'd have a combined magnetic and acoustic sweep. So that was how you were going to clear your waters. But of course, you weren't just going to clear one single narrow channel. You're going to go over it, as I said, 17, 18 times. You're also going to be widening it to the maximum extent possible to make you didn't want ships just going up a 200-yard wide channel. You were going to try and make it as wide as possible. So once you've got your initial channel, you then start on widening it as well. So these guys would be going up and down, up and down, up and down all the time. So that was what they were doing on the sweeping. I say acoustic sweeping, top left, the acoustic hammer mounted in the bows. And also a tactic that was quite effective was throwing explosives, small charges over the side to try and set off acoustic mines. They also had a slight effect on the pressure mines. It wasn't one I'd stake my life on, certainly, but certainly in more open waters where there was a swell running, you could sometimes put these in the water because the swell would negate the pressure system on the mine, and the explosions would create a acoustic wave, which would then set off the pressure acoustic mines.
And how is this coordinated? I mean, is there somewhat a single person in charge who's overseeing all these aspects, or is it various people in charge of the magnetic? This seems incredibly complicated.
Yeah, and the command and control was quite interesting. So first of all, overall in charge was not Admiral Ramsey with Eisenhower, and he didn't really have much of an active command and control role at this point. He was mainly acting as Eisenhower's maritime advisor. The Antwerp area, the Scheldt, belonged to Commander-in-Chief Knorr, Admiral Fleet Tovey, who had been in the first ship sunk in the First World War, which was sunk by a mine, HMS Amphion. So although he wasn't a mine specialist, he certainly had previous with mines. Excuse me. So he knew from bitter experience about them. So he was overall in command, but he delegated the close task to two minesweeping captains, very experienced. They'd been minesweeping duties all through the war. The captain in charge of minesweepers at Sheerness, and the captain in charge of minesweepers at Harwich. And the Harwich team, which was the slightly smaller one, was taking care of the outer approaches. And then the Sheerness team, or from Queensborough, they were going to do the inner Scheldt itself. And they were up to 100 minesweepers doing this. And Hopper, Captain Hopper, who was the force commander for this force, he was afloat initially, but then he went ashore at Terneuzen as soon as they could get established ashore, because at this point you just didn't have the communications, you didn't have effective C2 if you were afloat. So he wanted to get ashore as quickly as possible. And then each group of minesweepers would be under a flotilla. So you'd have 5 or 6 minesweepers under a flotilla commander. So he would do the immediate tactical hour by hour control of the sweeping formation. And then Captain Hopper, the overall force commander, he'd be doing the issuing orders for the next day, assessing which areas had been swept sufficiently, which areas were now a priority. So he'd be controlling it from that perspective. And he'd be sending his signals back to Commander-in-Chief Knorr, and he was copying them to Admiral Ramsey at Chafe HQ as well.
Okay. Moving on.
So I mentioned where the minesweepers were going to come from, or the C2. They were coming from Sheerness and Harwich. And this is the battle space that they'd been fighting in, the Thames Estuary. At one point, very early in the war, the Port of London at the beginning of the war was the most important port in the UK. And Nick Hewitt, his book on the convoys, absolutely makes this clear. I'm absolutely voracious amount of demand for coal in London and the southeast. It was coming down the East Coast convoys, and it was coming in through the Thames Channel. Over 300 vessels lost in these waters during the war. I think 130 Royal Naval vessels. And trawlers lost 20% of their numbers. There were 1,000 trawlers requisitioned during the Second World War by the Royal Navy, and 200 were lost. So that's a 20% loss rate in trawlers, anti-submarine and minesweeping duties. So huge attrition. Most of those vessels lost in their merchant and navy were due to mines. At one point, the Port of London was closed. There were 4 entrances in there, or 4 deep channels. They only had one open at one point when Germans hit them unexpectedly with a magnetic mine in 1939. So the minesweepers from Harwich, the minesweepers from Sheerness had been fighting this war from the very, very beginning. So they were incredibly experienced, incredibly capable. Plus, they'd been operating in waters which was sort of akin to the Scheldt. You know, they're very, very exposed, narrow channels, dangerous waters, wrecks, all this sort of stuff. So actually, it was like an ideal training school for the forces that were going in to do a similar job, if you like, or more of a breakthrough operation into the Scheldt. And of course, in Hopper and Marsh, the two force commanders, you had exceptionally experienced mine specialists who really, really knew their stuff. So these are where your friendly forces were coming from.
Wow.
Other friendly forces involved in the campaign were the destroyers and the coastal forces, who were going to try and protect the Minesweeping force, specifically from E-boats coming down from the Hook of Holland and around that area, because there was still significant German E-boat forces there. Every night you'd have destroyers and coastal forces on patrol, destroyers with radar queuing coastal forces in to try and intercept E-boats. They were going to come and attack the Minesweepers, or even more dangerously, lay more mines. And by and large, they did a pretty good job on this. And on here is just a list of the forces involved. So Force B was the smaller force. That was going to deal, as I said, with the approaches. Force A, well, I won't read it through. You can just see all the numbers of vessels going to be used in that. So
I mean, it's a staggering number, isn't it? I mean, this isn't just a couple of boats going out doing it. This is a massively extensive operation that is vital, as you said there. That this is not, the ground battle is dependent on this. This is a maritime battle that the ground elements are part of, essentially. Yeah.
So we were throwing the kitchen sink at this one, and basically we were going to throw as much at it as could fit into the Scheldt estuary, and that was the idea, because we were under no illusions about how important it was to get Antwerp open.
So well, people can read that at their leisure.
Yeah, and there I'm going to put my glasses on now so I can read this bit as well. So here you've got the we talk about now the tactics, and we can see how we were going to go in and actually do this. This was the plan for how they were going to work their way up the Scheldt. So at the beginning, at the very front, because even the motor launches might be too deep a draft with the anti-invasion mines that the Germans could use in the Scheldt waters, we were going to put some landing craft in with snag line sweeps. So leading the whole thing were a bunch of small landing craft that were going to go in with snag lines behind them, and they were just going to try and get any vessels that were there to target the Minesweepers. You've got a motor launch following, working sonar. That was going to try and detect any wrecks that were not previously known, so the forces behind could perhaps divert. And you can see the gaps that we're going to, the gaps between formations would allow time for diversions. Interestingly, the landing craft, well, they binned that on day one, and they were, because the conditions were quite marginal, the landing craft weren't very, very effective. So the effectively became the motor launches as the tip of the sword. So they were going to go in with a very, very shallow wire sweep. And then they were going to be followed by down layers. They were going to be marking the initial channel. Motor Minesweeper 1086, that was a new kind of acoustic sweep they were testing. They weren't sure about it, so she was wide berth. And then on the next slide, you just see this massive formation now of sweepers are coming up. So a BYMS flotilla. So each of these flotillas, as I say, would have a flotilla commander, making sure they were in formation, they were navigating correctly and doing their job. So two flotillas there, the 159th, the 157th. They'd be followed by a motor minesweeper, mine destruction. So if you get any contact mines come to the surface, under the Hague Convention, they're supposed to be render themselves safe. But the Germans weren't following the Hague Conventions on mine warfare at this point. So you'd need vessels following on astern just to sink any floating mines, because they could still be dangerous. The normal method of doing this was with rifles, fire at the casings and sink the mines. Try not to hit the horns. It looks good, but it's dangerous. You don't want to be near one of those when they blow up. Theoretically, the captain of Minesweepers would be behind these formations in motor launch 221. That was binned fairly quickly. You can't exercise effective command and control in these circumstances, which is why he was very, very keen to get ashore and have his staff operating with the communications, with the space, with the room in a shore facility. And then at the tail, you had this massive formation of motor minesweepers operating their magnetic sweeps and their acoustic sweeps. So that was the package that they were going to send up the Scheldt, and that was going to work back and forth, widening the channel, running down the actuations. So that was the plan.
We've got a couple of questions about air power. So Peter O'Connell is saying about Allied use. So were airstrikes on the shipping channel done to detonate acoustic and pressure mines? And then Ian T is asking about, did the Luftwaffe try and attack minesweeping operations? So basically, is there anything happening in the air, either Allied or Axis at this point?
Well, as a former naval officer, I'm inherently cynical about the Royal Air Force. I'll try and set that aside. We tried using aircraft and bombing off Le Havre and going up the Seine. They're just not accurate enough. You want to define a navigational channel with a high degree of accuracy, right, and we just couldn't get that accuracy from bombers. So that was going to happen. Very little interference from the Luftwaffe with the operations, because even more so than over Normandy, and we had air superiority at that point, so they weren't getting in. And interestingly, they didn't try and do much relaying at night, which is when off Normandy it was all happening at night. Every night you could get dozens of German aircraft in over the beaches, over the seas, off the beaches, laying mines. Here they just didn't have that capacity to do it. And a bit later on, there was a couple of mass raids in December after the port was opened, where formations of Junkers 88s came in and laid mines. But during the actual operation calendar, which started on the 4th of November, the only real mine laying effort came from E-boats, and we interdicted most of those, not all of them, but we got most of them.
Okay. And I just want to acknowledge Jack Hunter, who's been busy answering questions in the sidebar as fast as they're coming up, which you told me, Nick, he would be doing that. But Jack has a question as well. DWI, was that tried for this?
Sorry, what was the
DWI?
No, we didn't use them. Right, DWI. Good question, Jack, and thanks for being my defensive coordinator again tonight.
He's fielding all the questions, and he's doing a great job.
I know. The boy's doing good. DWI, it was a three-letter abbreviation for the Wellington bomber that was fitted with a magnetic coil.
Right.
And viewers might have seen photographs of these. It's like a circular coil around the bottom, a big circular coil underneath a Wellington. It was called DWI to confuse the Germans at the beginning of the war. It's one of our first counters to the magnetic mine. DWI stood for Directional Wireless Indicator, which was meant to throw them off in the same way that the word tank in the First World War was meant to throw the Germans off what tanks really were. They would have actually been quite useful at this point, but they were pretty much committed then at this point to the Suez Canal, which was much easier for them navigationally. They could have done a job for us in the Scheldt, but they weren't considered. They weren't brought back. It was going to be a shipborne effort. And again, you're talking about navigational accuracy within 100 yards. Some of the wider parts of the Scheldt, I don't think they'd have been able to give you that sort of accuracy. But a good question, and I've not seen any reference to them. But yeah, it could have been an option. Yeah, so I just thought I'd sort of walk through the chronology of the battle now, or the maritime campaign. So I talked about all the again, mid-October, they're trying to survey the parts of the Scheldt where they've got control. So they get a survey boat over land to Terneuzen to start surveying the eastern part of the Scheldt where it's safe to do so. And all the time in the run-up to calendar, we're trying to sweep lanes up to the outer approaches as close as we can to where the German batteries are, Flushing, Anvakeren itself, Breskens, Nocker, Zeebrugge. And that was the point at which we couldn't go any further. So all the time leading up to the main operation, we're trying to sweep up from Ostend. We're clearing routes across the North Sea, clearing minefields that we know about, using the big fleet minesweepers. And then on the 1st of November, the Algerine-class fleet minesweepers are clearing a channel, and they're firing boxes for the Warspite and the monitors that are going to fire in the attack on Valkyrie by the commandos. So that's Operation Infatuate on the 1st. On the 2nd, the sweepers get a bit too punchy. They're getting a bit too close, and we have 3 of them damaged by shell fire from Nocker, I think, because Nocker still remains uncaptured. And I don't think the last batteries that are going to threaten our efforts at Nocker and Zeebrugge, they're not captured until the 3rd of November. And on the 4th, we have the start of Operation Calendar. So we have one force clearing the outer approaches, and as soon as they've got a gap that's wide enough, the bigger force, Force A, goes in and starts getting into the Scheldt estuary itself. Still coming under fire from unsuppressed batteries, because there's still fighting going on at Flushing at this point. But at that point, they just want to get on with the job.
I was going to ask you, Nick, about who is dictating the timetable, because as Tobias said this afternoon, the whole battle for the Scheldt is pretty damn complicated, with various phases. There's the bombardments by the Lancasters happening as well. Then there's all the various landings in different places. So who's dictating the time frame? Are the operations scheduled, and then the minesweeping just has to be done within that timetable, or is the minesweeping influencing when things are happening?
At this point, it's Commander-in-Chief Knorr who, as soon as he's got the word that I think Operation Switchback, I think that's been completed, he's satisfied from reports that Flushing has been sufficiently suppressed to be worth the risk. And basically, he's happy to lose. He's not happy to lose a few ships, but he's prepared to lose minesweepers to get this job done.
Right.
You're not going to make an omelette without cracking eggs. So
yeah,
it's this is an important job, and if we look at human life, you look at the sacrifices of the Canadian Army, which is numbering in its thousands. So you really would. How would a maritime commander look at his army colleagues in the eye and say, I can't afford to lose a few hundred sailors? I mean, that sounds brutal.
Yeah.
This was still an existential war, and that's.
I mean, my takeaway from this, I think I even mentioned that in the Normandy show you did, is that there's no point when you can absolutely say for certainty that this part of the operation is complete. Whereas if you're taking out, for example, gun batteries down the coast, a quick reconnaissance by aircraft can say, yes, that one's been knocked out, that's been knocked out, that's been knocked out. These 3 threats have eliminated. But mines in an estuary, it's only going to be to a certain extent. Well, we're more or less certain that we've more or less cleared this channel, but nothing is 100%. And I find that whole concept really fascinating. As you were saying about the defending of London as a port, it's an ongoing job to which there is no completion. The fact that you mentioned the fact they found these mines in the estuary 3 weeks ago or something, it's still ongoing. And I find that concept of when you can't just draw a line under something and say, yeah, done. It's never that, is it?
No. Yeah, and you just say, how much risk do you want to take?
Yes, it's risk and reward, isn't it? Yeah.
So, and they're prepared to take risk, but experience has shown you do need a fairly heavy level of suppression of the shore batteries. Flushing, they were still getting firing from Flushing, but they were going to take that one on the chin. They could take that. So 4th of November, Tovey at the north says go. His 2 forces have formed up off. One force is formed up off Ostend. to do the outer approaches, and the force for the Scheldt itself is formed up off the North Foreland, off the falls, just off the tip of Kent, and then that goes across. But he's kept a very, very strict control on this, even more so after he had some boats shot up on the 2nd of November, with Minesweepers getting slightly over enthusiastic. So the 4th of November was when it started, really. And on that first day, they got through as far as Terneuzen, with obviously a narrow channel, and they swept 74 mines on that first day. So they got there, and then it was just an ongoing process. They were coming under fire from Flushing until that one was suppressed, but they were just working their way up and down the channel. Also on the 4th, actually, they managed to get 4 or 5, I think they were Belgian crewed motor minesweepers, slipped all the way through to Antwerp. And they got up to Antwerp that night, and then they were able to start working back westwards to join the main force. So that was something of a bonus.
Wow!
But I imagine the Belgian Minesweeper crews were pretty keen to do that.
Yeah. Wow! Incredible.
And I think a couple of motor launches got up there as well. Right. And then it's just a steady war of attrition. And you see here, just sweeping. Gear is taking a hell of a pounding. It's obviously shallow waters, sandbanks, stuff like that. So it's getting trashed on the seabed. It's getting trashed by the German counter-sweeping gear they've got on their mines. At one point, one of the flotillas, out of 20 sets of minesweeping gear, it's only got 8 sets still operational. There's a constant demand for more sweep gear to be sent, because they're just chewing up this gear. And also on the minesweepers themselves, you see the detonation front left. That's actually minesweeping operations off the Normandy beachhead, but it makes no difference. But you're on a minesweeper, and that happens to you 6 or 7 times in a day, and this is what was happening. Then at the end of the day, your minesweeper is on, well, I won't say on its knees. It's a boat, but you can imagine it's pretty shattered, and it's starting to get leaks, massive machinery defects. So the attrition on the boats themselves is very, very significant, which is why you need such a high number of them. Because every day you've got vessels unable to recommence operations the next morning because their machinery has been thrown out of alignment, their propeller shafts are bent, or their hulls are a mess. So this is going on all the time, and they're just chewing through the gear. And then on top of that, you're getting some very, very severe gales coming through. So that's interfering with operations. There are some days where only in the very closest inshore waters can they do any sweeping. Off the outer approaches, they're not able to do anything because of the nature of the gales. And we start to lose a couple of ships, but that's entirely expected. What is interesting on the 8th of, I think 8th of November, sometime around that, 21st Army Group called for a conference. And they haul Hopper, the Force A commander, in, and 21st Army Group, and ComZ, who's the American head of logistics, I think. And they start to beat him up about, when you're going to get this damn port open, which I think is a bit rich coming from 21st Army Group. But Hopper sticks to his guns and said, look, this is the situation. This is what we're facing. And I'm not going to deviate from the dates I gave you. The dates I gave you are realistic dates. And therefore, we anticipate it being done completed towards the end of November. And interestingly, Ramsey is copied in on this exchange, and he signals straight away, I am in absolute support of Commander-in-Chief Knorr and the Minesweeper Force Commander on this. The job will be done when it's done, and they will tell you when it's done. So he weighs in quite quickly. And Ramsey's got awareness of this. He's the one who said before D-Day that he considered the mine to be the most significant threat to the success of the landings. So he's mine-minded, if you like. So so this is quite interesting. background noise. It doesn't help anyone. Hopper at this point is working in a staff office in Terneuzen with his staff, so he's controlling it quite effectively from there. And the outer approaches, the command and control from that's being done at Ostend. And what happens in the nuts and bolts is every time a ship lifts a mine or blows a mine, you get a report of the exact position, lat and long, and then the shore authorities are plotting those positions. They can see perhaps where there's a line of mines developing, where they can then target their efforts because they know there's a mine line or something like that, or they can just, if necessary, they can say, okay, well, we've got a better route to go around that. We won't even bother looking at those mines yet. We'll go around them, because avoiding the mine fields are very, very effective mine countermeasures. But obviously, in an estuary, you can't do that much. You can't do it too many times.
Wow. Well, moving on, I guess. Fantastic stuff. People are loving it, by the way. I should point out that it's going down very well.
Oh, I'm pleased to hear it. I've lost track of the time, actually. Right. So, we're getting close now. 20th of November, say. They're starting to, firming up on 28th of November is the date. They're starting to prepare and form up the convoy that will go through. They're starting to talk about what are we going to do to defend the Scheldt once we've got it completely cleared. They're starting to talk about nets across the entrance, anti-swimmer defenses, anti-mini submarine defenses, things like that. They've got 50 balloons up in the air. Finally, they're aiming to get 500 up to stop any German air attacks when they do come. They're even talking about things like where we're going to find the Belgian flags to put on the convoy, because they want the first 6 ships of the convoy to be wearing Belgian flags as a sign of respect for the Belgians. So you've got all that sort of thing going on, and along both banks of the Scheldt now, you're starting to establish mine watching posts. So your little lookout stations all the way along the Scheldt. They've got over 100 of them, with people sitting in there ready to report any observed aerial mine laying. And what's that on that? They if they see it, they plot the bearing, estimate the range, try and triangulate. They can feed that back into the minesweeping commander. That would be at night, especially. That'd be a very useful thing to do. So they're getting ready for that. 26th. Sorry, this is a photo of Hopper in his HQ.
Right,
it's the chap with the pipe, and these are the matlows the sort of matlows who are doing this job. A lot of them part of the Royal Naval Patrol Service, not the regular Royal Navy. So a lot of the auxiliary sweepers are manned by Royal Naval Patrol Service. I've said this on a previous presentation where I've used this slide. You can spot the chef out of those 4 matlows. You can definitely tell who ate all the pies.
Yeah. We mustn't say that, of course, these days. He is, but yes, we can indeed tell where the pies have gone.
I don't want to get you banned from YouTube, Woody. I'm sorry about
that. No problem. we can all draw our own conclusions from that photo there. Yeah.
So anyway, on the 26th. On the 26th, they managed to get 3 coasters through. On the 27th, there are more mine explosions, so they suspend it for another day. And then on the 28th, they get the first convoy through, and very appropriately, it's headed by the Fort Cataraqui, which is a Canadian merchant vessel, flying the Canadian flag. I think there was a small Belgian flag on there somewhere, but it was definitely going to go in flying the Canadian flag. And then that's it. Then the port's brought into operation. Continual non-stop minesweeping effort going on, because the German Air Force does start laying mines. E-boats are laying mines off the outer entrance still. So the minesweeping effort doesn't stop. Ship losses occur steadily all the way through the remainder of the period. Of course, you've got V2s landing in Antwerp docks as well. In fact, you've got port divers working in the docks even as the V2s are coming in. But it doesn't stop their work. And by the end of the operation, they've bagged just about, I've got the figure somewhere. What was it? About 300 mines. They've bagged about 300 mines in the outer approaches, in the mouth of the Scheldt, and all the way up the river. and in the docks in the area around that. They've cleared about 300 mines. But what they've done for the loss of relatively few ships, to be honest, is they've secured strategic logistics for the rest of the war for the Allied forces in Northern Europe. So, and that was the measure of their task. And there you can see Tovy's words about it.
When we did have the question about how many ships were lost, what was the cost in both shipping lost and in human life? And, I mean, because I think we have this measure that unless lots of people die, it can't have been difficult. But I think sometimes you can have an operation like this that is incredibly important, incredibly taxing and difficult. But actually, the death toll isn't astronomical. But so what are we talking about?
I think we lost. In the Scheldt itself, we only lost two vessels, a motor launch and a motor minesweeper, both pretty much atomized by mine explosions. We lost a few more in the outer approaches.
Right.
We're also losing quite a few off Ostend at this point. We're losing some big landing craft. We lost Danlairs. We lost a couple of big fleet minesweepers there as well, because the E-boats were also laying mines off Ostend. But I think it was General Wavell who incurred Churchill's wrath by I think it was the Somali campaign in the beginning of the Second World War, saying a big butcher's bill isn't necessarily the sign of a good battle.
Yeah,
and I think that applies here. Again, nothing like the level of sacrifice of the soldiers and the appalling conditions they had fighting. But I think the point of this is it was a strategic effort. Clearing Antwerp was a strategic priority, and it was only second only to getting the troops into and sustaining them onto the Normandy beachhead. That was how important this was, and this was actually far more tactically complex and demanding of minesweeping skills than the battles off the Normandy beachhead. And there you see I think it's just a fitting one, the Dutch people welcoming or waving at a minesweeper in the Scheldt. I think it's just a nice picture. It
is indeed, and we're at the point where we can do questions. Although, in fact, Jack has been answering most of them in the sidebars when we're going along. And there's how people can contact you. But my first question, Nick, is that it's already come up already about the time it. We're not going to get into the whole Eisenhower and Montgomery and strategy, but the fact is that by the time they pushed into the Scheldt, they could have done it a bit earlier. They could have done it 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. That's kind of the ongoing debate. But how the minesweeping operation would have taken the same length of time, pretty much, had it started a month earlier or 6 weeks earlier. Did the Germans throw much extra in that last, in the 2 or 3 weeks that they're, I'm not going to say kicking their heels, but they're not pushing into Scheldt there? Had the Germans made any notable additions to the mines that we know of during that time?
No, I don't think they did. And you had the 64th German Infantry Division, which had its hands full. They had no real maritime forces in the Scheldt at that point. They had the E-boats and whatever up to the north. They were coming in, but they were doing a lot of their effort was Ostend, Dieppe, places like that. They were mining the mouth of the Scheldt, but in the Scheldt itself, in the narrow part of the estuary, there was no increase in mines there that I'm aware of.
So it's just interesting that when we get into the debate about whether or not there should have been a different focus, it's come up whether the Allies should have gone for Aachen. Was Arnhem just a sideshow? As you talked about yourself, Antwerp should have been more of a focus. Whenever you go for it, the minesweeping operation is going to take the time it's going to take. So you're not going to be able to suddenly wave a magic wand and make that go faster. Yes, there's a possibility there would be less German troops defending or blah 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 blah. But the minesweeping thing is pretty much a fixed issue. So do you think, in your kind of reading about the sort of general kind of broad front, narrow front Antwerp, I'm assuming you think that the minesweeping never gets mentioned in those debates. It never gets talked about, or the naval aspect particularly doesn't really get much coverage. It's always about what the Canadian Army is doing. Is that a fair comment?
The focus is always on the land fighting, without a real understanding of what the land fighting was going on for. And the land fighting was going on to secure the banks of the Scheldt so that the minesweepers could do their job, so that the merchant shipping could go through, and then provide the support. And so the end state wasn't the defeat of German troops around the Scheldt area and in Brest pocket. That wasn't the campaign end state. The campaign end state was of Antwerp being free. So the sweeping effort should just be looked as another phase, and the land battles were one phase. The maritime battle of getting into the Scheldt was another phase of that campaign, with the end state of freeing Antwerp.
I just want to put.
I've sort of studied. I'm a Matlow, but I've studied Arnhem as well. It's just inconceivable to me how they thought they could sustain a force at Arnhem without Antwerp being open. I just can't understand how they thought to bounce the Rhine or whatever without Antwerp being open. It's utterly inconceivable.
It is confusing, and I wanted to bring up the slide there with the Ramsey quote, because Ramsey seems to have a real grip on this very early on. That quote there is saying, you know, that he recognizes that Antwerp is important, and we're into the whole when it gets to this point of the war, Eisenhower's directives, sometimes they're a little bit vague about exactly what should be done. If you think that, and we should probably focus on, whereas actually not always giving a firm directive. But it all stems from this the Allies now have options, whereas prior to the Overlord, the second front is the key thing. They get the second front established. The Germans then respond to it. Then they break out of Normandy. Then suddenly, for the first time, the Allies have options. They can look at this, you know, Metz and Germany that way, and Aachen and Arnhem and Antwerp, and having a set of different options always presents a complication, because you're going to have a division of opinion. People are going to, well, we should go this way. Well, we should go that way.
Yeah, I suppose you look at Eisenhower. A measure of his greatness, I suppose, was that he was able to keep these sort of different characters, on the same side. So, but to achieve that, obviously, maybe he gets, well, he does. In my view, he does get some calls wrong. Perhaps he should have been a bit firmer with Montgomery on getting Antwerp open earlier. But you know, that's possibly the penalty you pay for having someone of Eisenhower's incredible abilities, that occasionally sometimes these things get missed. I know it's possibly an interesting conversation on that one.
Well, it is. The MIDI doctor said, you know, did any of the upper echelon of commanders, Eisenhower, Monty, etc., ever ask how long it would take to clear the mines before Market Garden? And I think this is when we, as you said there yourself, Nick, Eisenhower is an incredibly good diplomat. He's keeping all these egos in check, but I can't imagine how many reports are going across his desk on a daily basis. He's you know, the strategic bombing campaign, the ground campaign, logistics, all the things that he's, and I'm assuming during all of that, he just hasn't got 2 days to take out and be briefed on minesweeping operations by somebody. His calendar, his dance card, I'm imagining, is fairly full at this time, as is Montgomery's. I'm not defending them per se. I mean, I think we can clearly see that there are some errors of judgment at this time, but it's not like he isn't a little bit busy at this time, as indeed they all are. And there is this, you know, this overriding sense. I mean, it came up in the conversation with Tobias this afternoon, this idea of the war being over by Christmas, which I don't necessarily think always means a literal being over by Christmas, but is a sort of a, let's bring this to a swift end now. The end is in sight. And I think people have got a little bit of, not sort of victory fever, but the closing of the Falaise Gap quite quickly, the liberation of Paris, Rome has been liberated. I think there is this sense of, we can get stuff done, and maybe everyone's a little bit overconfident. And then as you get into October, November, and the Hürtgen Forest bogs down, and Metz bogs down, and Market Garden doesn't go well, kind of the pragmatic realization that actually, no, we have got a few more months of fighting. I think, you know, you see that kind of mood change going into November. And, you know, the Canadian Army has been absolutely hammered by this campaign after numerous hammerings, and has got more hammerings to come. And I think that's where it kind of sits for me, is this, it's bridging a couple of eras within the Allied high command of kind of confidence and then realization. And I think, you know, you've admirably explained how complicated this is, and that's how a lot of things are at this time of year, in the September and October, November 44, things that maybe seemed to be quite simple ended up becoming very, very time consuming and problematic.
Yeah, I think you'll be over that more than me in terms of and what was going on in the land commanders' minds at that point. But yeah, I can understand that. Perhaps the belief that just one more push and the whole thing might fall apart, given the success and how quickly it got to Antwerp. As you say, but then suddenly everything just sort of solidifies along that front. And Ramsey, the day before Antwerp was captured, he was flagging it up to Eisenhower, but I only see 28 days mentioned on the mid-October. I think Tovey puts in a reminder. This is how long it's going to take. I don't know what was passed to Ramsey. I don't know what Ramsey passed to Eisenhower before that. And they must have had conversations about it, but I haven't seen that detail.
Well, Nick, it's been great talking to you again. I'll have to find an excuse to bring you back and do another Minesweeping. We haven't done the Mediterranean yet. Have we done the Mediterranean? We haven't done Sicily. There's lots more things we can do at this.
I can do Malta. Malta
will be good. Malta will be good. We'll do it in the future. And folks, we've got 2 shows tomorrow. So there's an 8 a.m. UK time where I'm talking to Craig Tibbets over in Australia about the Australian 9th Division in Tobruk. And then we've got Stephen Fisher coming on, expanding on the Royal Naval aspect, but more in terms of supporting amphibious landings tomorrow. And then Wednesday, we're off to Operation Dragoon. And then there's more things coming up Thursday, Friday. So as always, thank you, everybody, for your comments. Keep supporting the channel. Consider becoming a patron. Buy my guests' books. Share on social media. And basically keep watching. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody else. I will see you all again for 2 more shows tomorrow. Cheers. Bye.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.